All right. Hello, everybody. Justin here, Chief Experience Officer of Untapped New York. I am with you alone today. I am the speaker. I'm not moderating, so I'm Chief Cook and Bottle Washing again. Happy to be with you. I see a bunch of messages in the chat. Hi, Norma. It's good to see you too. Uh, Hi, Stanley. We've got Mark from the Financial District in Boston. Good old John DeSantos here. Hi, John. How you doing? Um, Jack from Union Square. We have Joe from London. Hi, Joe. Robert from Rutledge. Our good old standbys. David Ryan from Cork. Welcome back. And Jeffrey Bernard from the Upper West Side. Klaus Peter from Midtown. Ralph. Oh, everybody's here. Great. Um, Pete from San Francisco. Lisa, Paradise Valley. Woohoo. I know. All right. I always say all right. It's either all right or welcome. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to start singing when I start next time. Middle Village, Queens. All right. I'm going to get started, but you can keep saying hello in the chat. For those of you who join me, you do know that sometimes I tend to go up to the hour. I tried very hard this time to keep this a very compact experience. There's a lot to talk about in the financial district, but I also know some of the other stuff that may come up. Mandy might be picking up in her part two of her Dutch New Amsterdam talk in a couple of weeks. I would pick up on another tour, and actually I tried to keep this pieces of a tour that I developed privately for a couple of companies that deal with sites in the financial district we don't always talk about. I know for the maritime tour, I talked about a lot of the steamship row buildings, so we're not going to really talk about those this time. If any of you missed any of those talks, like Mandy's first Dutch New Amsterdam, my maritime history tour, those are in the archives for you to check out. And again, there'll be more that we will piece together as we move along. But this tour gave me an excuse. So I'll set a little background here. A company had hired us to pick up 3 waves of their guests. They were getting a Woolworth building tour. I was supposed to pick them up at the Woolworth building and give them 45 minutes of the secrets of the financial district. And for those of you who have ever joined me on an actual tour in New York, you realize a lot of things. I like to walk, and I like to take a good solid 2 hours with the tours because there's always a lot to talk about. So this was a huge challenge for me, but I picked them up at the Woolworth building. So our path is basically going to be Woolworth down Broadway, loop around Water Street, towards the tip. We're not going to talk about the Battery. That will be for another tour, whether Mandy or myself do it. A couple of really cool spots on Water Street, then back up to Wall Street, where we'll spend a majority of the time today. Now, by the way, that picture is the Churchyard of Trinity, which we will get to at the end of the tour. There's a really great, I think, hidden little spot there, not Alexander Hamilton. But this gives me an opportunity to talk about the corner of Ann and Broadway. And the corner of Ann and Broadway was the home of the famous American Museum, and it really was the start of P.T. Barnum, Phineas T. This was before he started his circus. He put all of these oddities in one giant building on the corner of Ann Street, and this thing ran from 1841 to 1865. Now, what's amazing about it is, in its time open, it saw 38 million people come through the door and pay 25 cents to go into it. Now, you have to remember the population of the United States in the 1840s, 1850s was roughly 30 million people. So an entire population of the country at the time, in number, came through Barnum's museum. And the reason why was it was a spectacle. This is a sketch of the inside of the theater where shows and talks and lectures were held. Of course, some of the shows we would consider not politically correct today, but Barnum made a spectacle. And a lot of things that he did was, of course, fake, but it was all about the showmanship. And you had the Fiji Mermaid, which was a big hit, an Egyptian mummy, which was claimed to be 30,000 years old. They had an Egyptian mummy with a mermaid's tail. There was the duck-billed platypus. As you can see, this is actually an ad getting people to come to his museum. But one of my favorite things is looking at the whale. So he built a whale tank on the second floor of this museum and put a small beluga whale in there for people to see. And it's funny, this was whale watching on Broadway. You'd never think ever in your life that you could actually whale watch on Lower Broadway, but P.T. Barnum brought that to you. And one of the most popular acts were actual Siamese twins, Ang and Chang, who were there for everybody to see. That's an actual picture of them. Well, it's a sketch of them, but they were real people and they were real conjoined twins. They're again, besides the Fiji mermaid, he had an oyster bar there. You could eat there. It was a huge attraction. Unfortunately, in 1865, it burned to the ground, like a lot of things do in New York. But that pushed Barnum himself to pair up with Bailey, and they started their roaming circus. And of course, that's how we know Barnum best. But Barnum was a huge New York character, and again, it was because of that museum. Here is basically a cartoon of the Barnum Museum burning and all of the oddities sort of running out into the street as the museum burns. This is my favorite picture. I love this painting of Barnum's American Museum. Again, this is where my cursor is the corner of Ann and Broadway. And I'll show you what that shot looks like today. This would be Fulton and Broadway, the opposite corner where Fulton Center is. And this is a Google shot of what's there now. It's a Zara and an office building. So a little less spectacular than Barnum's Museum itself. Whoop. Let me go there. So again, St. Paul's, you could do a whole talk on St. Paul's. St. Paul's is the oldest continuous public space in New York. 1766 it was built. It's called the Little Chapel. That stood mainly because it did survive the terrorist attacks on 9/11. But I'm not going to talk about the chapel. There's a lot that goes on in the chapel. It was George Washington's favorite chapel. There's Washington's Pew, the first monument in the United States. I want to talk about, don't know why that's doing that, my apologies, this, which is actually the oldest obelisk in Manhattan. And it's to a guy who, this is a really crazy story, and I'm going to try to sum it up as best I can. William James McNiven. He was a doctor. He was an Irish immigrant. But before he came over from Ireland, he was a revolutionary fighting against Great Britain. He was a Catholic and he was a republic, an Irish republic. Well, the British called them terrorists, but he was a freedom fighter. But he leaves Ireland because he loses all of his money in the revolution. He comes to America and he starts hanging out with scientists, and he becomes what we know as the father of modern chemistry. As a matter of fact, if you look closer here, you'll see the inscription on this obelisk, his date of birth, his death. He's not buried there, by the way. He's buried in Astoria, Queens. But you'll see this inscription, who in the cause of his native land sacrificed the bright prospect of his youth and past years in poverty and exile, comes to America, till in America he found a country which he loved as truly as he did the land of his birth. To the service of this country, which had rejected him as a son, received him, as a son. He devoted his high scientific acquirements with his eminent ability. Okay, so he actually starts fooling around with the atomic models. He makes great contributions in early chemistry. But why is this there? It's not because of that. So there was a thing called the Fenian Raids in 1866, and this is a story that gets slipped through American Irish history. There were a group of Irish Republican Army men who came to America and raised money to launch an invasion on Canada. They wanted to invade Canada so that it would be a weakening of the British stronghold in North America, and thus a weakening of the British stronghold over Ireland and Europe. And how did they raise a portion of the funds to stage this ill-fated raid? Obviously, and they did do it, by the way. It didn't last very long. They raised the money by getting this obelisk up in honor of him. So when I walk by, I always say, hey, remember that time that we invaded Canada? And everybody says, no. Well, this is the monument to that for a guy who had nothing to do with it, by the way. He was a symbol. Now, we walk a little further down Broadway, and again, I'm going to say this over and over again. So this is one of my favorite things about Lower Manhattan. It's the William Bartman clock. So Bartman's opened on Broadway in 1884. Now, in 1899, William Bartman himself decided he wanted to put in sort of a ploy that would get people into the shop. So he and his coworker devised a clock that they could sink into the sidewalk. And at the time, it was very, very technologically advanced. It was to a degree self-winding. It had a light under it, so it lit up at night. And this drew a lot of attention. The problem is the original clock started failing in 1925. It was replaced with this clock, which then actually started failing a couple of years ago when Bartman's pulled out of its space on Broadway. So they took the clock out to fix it. And for a couple of months, actually almost a year, it was not in its place. There was just the Bartman's hole all around it. They replaced it. So the funny story is I was giving this tour to that company the day they were replacing the clock face. We stopped there. I saw the mechanics with the group and I started like getting giddy. I said, "Are you kidding me? You're installing the clock today?" They said, "Yes, we are." There was a New York News One reporter standing off to the side and she says, "Do you know anything about this clock?" And I said, "Hell yeah, I do." She said, "All right, can I interview you?" So they interviewed me while I was giving the tour. I came back to get pictures a little later. Clock never made it back in. They had the wrong size machinery. It took another 3 months for them to put the clock in. And that was the day it was supposed to go. And it was a big deal. I was even on the news talking about it. And it didn't go in for another couple of months. I took this picture of the clock. It was reinstalled last week. So this is what the Bartman clock looks like at the moment, unfortunately. Bartman's moved out of their space, but there was a vitamin shop there. So I got this picture last week too. The vitamin shop sign was ripped up off of 174 Broadway, and you can see the ghost of the William Bartman sign under it. I was so, so happy to see that. Of course, the building is a little bit in need of some repair, and vitamin shop pulled out of there. There is no business in there right now. It is empty. I'm assuming it'll probably remain that way through the rest of the pandemic. Moving a little bit further down Broadway, we get to Bowling Green. Now, Bowling Green, I'm sure Mandy, if I remember correctly, spoke about why it's called Bowling Green. It is New York's first park. As a matter of fact, if you look in the registries of the New York Parks Department, every borough has a number, and then every park by its chronological founding has a number. This is 0101. So this is Manhattan. This is the first park, 1733, made the municipal park by the English colonists of New York, called Bowling Green because of the tradition of the Dutch settlers bowling on this spot. But what I'm interested in is the fence. I know Mandy talked about this as well, but on July 9th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was read in New York Common, which is today City Hall Park. George Washington ordered it himself because he was headquartered at number 1 Broadway at the time. The militia goes up. Some of the city people go up to hear the Declaration of Independence. They get so charged with patriotism, they go down to Bowling Green and take down the gilded lead statue of King George III, who is meant to look like Marcus Aurelius, equestrian style. Now, this statue was placed right after the Townshend Acts were repealed. So what happened is King George III places the Townshend Acts. The colonists get a little cranky about it. It's the beginning of what we know as the Revolution, but New Yorkers stay cool. So in order to reward his New York subjects for being cool, he says, "I'm going to give you a gift." That gift is this statue of me looking like Marcus Aurelius. Now, New Yorkers hated it. It went in 1765, I believe. And then they started vandalizing it in the middle of the night. So they erected the fence. Now you'll see the fence represented in this painting right here. Also lead fence, not lead, iron fence, sorry. And they had to lock it at night. So people did not go and vandalize the statue. They put this fence up in 1766. A lot of people don't realize this fence is one of the oldest standing structures in Lower Manhattan. People look at it from afar and they think, it could be somewhere from the early 1900s, mid 1900s, 1800s. It's not, it's from 1776. Now, the posts of the fence had crown insignias of King George III on them. So as they were taking down the statue of King George III and they were mutilating it and chopping it up and sending it off to be melted down for musket bullets to be used against the Redcoats, 48,000, I believe, they were also sawing the crowns off the posts. So the whole reason I got into giving tours was I was teaching social studies, or what we know as American history, to a bunch of sixth graders on the Lower East Side, and they hated social studies. And I said, guys, come on, you live in the most history dense area of New York City. Let's go and touch some history. So I bring them to this fence, tell them the story, and I told all of my students, now rub your fingers over those uneven cuts of the fence posts. Those were made by patriots on July 9th, 1776. And of course, that was way cooler than just talking about it. So now every Dutch New Amsterdam tour I lead, I make people do the same thing. I tell them the story inside Bowling Green. We come out of Bowling Green and I say, here we go, touch history, one of the oldest structures in New York. And it's a real hit for a lot of people who don't realize you've got living, breathing history right there that you can reach out and touch. I'm a big fan of tactile interactions with history. This guy who's actually on the left side, he was Dutch. He was on the Dutch New Amsterdam tour. And he thought that was just the coolest thing in the world. So I love that. If you're down in the financial district, walking by Bowling Green Park, just tell everybody about it. Bring them up close. Any of the fence posts, you'll see those uneven cuts there. All right, so we're going to move around. There's also the oyster pasty gun, which I know Mandy talked about, but I want to tell you about some of the more modern fun secrets in the financial district that are worth talking about. Good spots to know about if you're stuck in the financial district and need a place to breathe. And if you go to 55 Water, basically round the tip of the Battery, go up to Water Street, 55 Water Street, there is these set of stairs and escalators that lead up to one of the coolest things in the financial district, and it's known as the Elevated Acre. The Elevated Acre was basically a demand of the city when this building wanted to, in the early 70s, make the building higher, basically add more floors on top. The city said, by ordinance, you have to provide public space to do so. And so they did. Now, the Elevated Acre is a really neat spot. There's tiered seating, there's a little amphitheater-like seating, there's open grass, but then I always like to call this the High Line of the financial district. There's a lot of great native landscaping going on. There are little copses of trees that you can hide in, tables. It's a really nice spot just to sit and take a break. And that railing ahead of us looks over the East River. And if anybody wants a really great view of Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Bridge, just sweeping views of the harbor, the Elevated Acre is a really great place to see those views. And again, very few people know about it because they walk by those escalators thinking that it's just an entrance into 55 Broadway, and it's not. It is a public space. There is free Wi-Fi. It's just one of these delightful secrets. I took another company on this tour that had just opened their offices at 44 Wall Street, and they wrote back to me and said, we do all of our company lunches here now. We tell people to go and sit out there, and we feel really cool that we know it's there. Unfortunately, I tried to go up when we did a filming of this tour a couple weeks ago for the pandemic. They have closed it during the pandemic. They may have reopened it now at phase 2, but I'm not sure. Again, another favorite of mine is 77 Water. So a couple buildings up the street. You look at this building and you say, it looks like any boxy steel glass office building put up in the late 70s or so. But this is a very different type of building because the owners, known as the Kaufman family, George Kaufman was the original owner, were very playful. When they bought buildings, and they own quite a few throughout New York, they only bought buildings with 7 in the address. That's because Kaufman's wife, George Kaufman's wife, her lucky number was 7. She loved the number 7. So he's bought buildings at 477 Uptown, and then of course 77 Water here. So they had decided when they opened this building in the late 70s that they just didn't want to make it a plain, boring office building. So they put in these art fixtures at the base of the building, and this is only one of them. There are a artful looking group of pot of pay telephones. There's some scrunched up steel hanging from the awning. There's also some fish, uh, sculpted steel fish swimming in a rock pond at the base. Again, all at the base at street level in the building. But two of my favorites. There's a oldie timey candy store, which is a functioning open. It is open. It was open during the pandemic too. Candy store in the base of the building. So it looks like something out of the late 1800s, but there it is nestled into the base of the building. And of course it has 77 on the sign because it was the Kaufman lucky number. But also George Kaufman was an aviation enthusiast. So on the roof of 77 is a model of a World War I Sopwith Camel plane on a runway, AstroTurf runway, that says 77 on it. Of course, very few people know this because you can't see the roof of the building. So you may be saying to yourself, and there is a roof level shot of the plane. The plane is not, it was not an actual working plane. It was an artist's rendition of a plane using some salvage plane parts, but it never flew. It's just a model. This is a Scouting New York picture of them lifting the plane up to the roof to put it up there. A really interesting process. They brought it down on the street. They hoisted it up on street level and then used a crane to lift the thing up. And it is still there today. This was my most recent Google Map shot of it. You can see it on Google Maps if you look it up right now. It is still there. The AstroTurf is a little worse for wear because of the weathering of it. But it's there, and there's a net on the plane to, I think, hold it in place and also to protect it a little bit. So if you move up Water Street to Water and Wall Street, this is sort of not a fun secret about New York, and for some people not a secret at all. And I know we've talked about it before, but the slave trade was a very active part of New York and New Amsterdam's development. As a matter of fact, this sketching right here was done in 1643, and this is a slave auction held in New Amsterdam. Now, when Peter Stuyvesant became the 6th Director General of New Amsterdam and the last Director General, he really solidified the slave trade, New York as a slave trade port, because he was dealing with the slave trade in Curaçao before he got up here. And he realized that the fur trade, which had founded New Amsterdam, was just not making any money, and they were running out of fur. So he figured if we could get slaves up here, that's where the big money is. So he re-triangulated the triangle trade route, brought slavery up to New York. And at first, you were basically auctioning off slaves at the water. So basically getting them off the boats, auctioning them right off the boats right there. But then they started doing it at the base of the wall, or at the water gate of the wall. And that sort of stuck for a very long time. Now, the New York slave market, you'll see this is a sketch of the Wall Street slave market in 1730. It was known as the meal market because they were also selling grain there as well, and wheat, along with slaves. And this is a staggering fact, which may have been mentioned on other talks. I may have mentioned it before in another talk as well. New York was the second largest slave market, second only to Charleston, which is or was the largest at the time. So we really made a lot of money for the city off of the slave trade. And again, it's a piece of history New Yorkers don't always like to face. As a matter of fact, the slaves literally, people say literally and figuratively, built the wall. Peter Stuyvesant brought in slaves to build the palisade, the physical palisade itself. And of course, the auctioning off of slaves made the city a lot of money. And we were auctioning and selling slaves for a very, very long time. And there was even back deal slave trading going on up until 1829. So much so that when we entered the Civil War, there were very many powerful New York businessmen who still had a lot of allegiances in the South. And we were a divided city as to whether or not we had Union allegiances or Confederate allegiances because of the slave trade. Now, when you go to the spot today, this is another slightly disappointing fact about the city, and this was only put up about 5 or so years ago. That's all that's there that commemorates it. It's a little plaque right at the base of Wall Street and Water, and that's it. It tells you basically the dates of the meal market, how long slavery was happening. The reason why they started putting slave auctions in one spot in the markets were because there were revolts at the auctions. So this was for the protection of the people of New York, or so they said. And again, a secret of New York that's not a happy one, but a darker one. So we move up Wall Street. And when we get to this building right here, this is the Museum of American Finance. And inside the Museum of American Finance is the founding document of the New York Stock Exchange, which was actually founded under a tree right across the street. But what I also like to show is this is the cornerstone of the original Bank of New York, which is laid into the cornerstone of the Museum of American Finance. And so late in 1797, and then built, the building didn't last that much longer, but then was replaced a couple of times until the building where the Museum of American Finance landed. But the cornerstone is there. When we do school scavenger hunts for the Lower Manhattan, it's always a stop on the scavenger hunt for the kids, and they're so proud when they find it, because you just walk right past it. But again, inside this museum, when it's open, is this document, the original document, which is the Buttonwood Agreement. And the Buttonwood Agreement was drafted up in May of 1792 by 24 stockbrokers under a buttonwood tree. Now, for people who don't know particularly what a buttonwood tree is, another way is to say sycamore, a sycamore tree on Wall Street, which again is basically right across the street where Cipriani's is today. And they basically agreed that they would give each other special preference in their dealings, and laid their hands and signed their signatures 1792, and thus begins the stock exchange. But the stock exchange doesn't have a permanent home for a very long time. It's first under a tree, then it moves to the Tontine Coffee House, which if you join me for the coffee tour, you'll know, very fundamental spot right on Wall and Pearl Street. It stayed there for a couple of years, paid rent for the second floor, moved on to a bunch of other smaller locations, one of which had burned, until it lands in the stock exchange in the early 1900s that we know and we'll talk about in a minute today. But there is I love this picture. It's kind of like an old claymation depiction of the signing of the Buttonwood Agreement under the sycamore tree. Reason why it's called the Buttonwood, by the way, is in the spring, during the height of pollen season, they form these sort of big knots of pollen. And so that when they fall to the ground, they almost kind of explode a little bit. And so they look like these little balls, which I guess they thought were buttons. Another fun fact, and I think, now I know Mandy spoke when she did the Dutch New Amsterdam tour. And again, if you haven't seen it, you definitely should watch it in the archives. She talked about the wall. And of course, the Wall of Wall Street was a 12-foot pine palisade on top of an earthen mound. It was restructured a couple of times in its history. And of course, Mandy showed us her pictures of uncovering some of the wall foundations in the foundation of Federal Hall, which was obviously super, super cool. But in 2008, running up Wall Street, there are these wooden posts running up the middle of the street that mark where the original wall was. Now, when I was doing Dutch New Amsterdam tours, and when I do Dutch New Amsterdam tours again, I bring people up here, I show them this, people love it, they don't know it's running up the middle of Wall Street. One of the tours, I heard some joker tour guide, I don't know who it was, I don't know what company he was working for, telling people that this was actual wood from the actual Dutch wall. Now, I want you to take a look at that picture. Take a look at that picture. That one's in really rough shape. The wood is really starting to rot and wear. These posts were installed in 2008 when they Euro cobbled Wall Street. So I don't think the wood was going to survive from Dutch New Amsterdam time, but what they have gone and done with these spots that are really sort of rotting through is they've started filling them in with basically decorative cement to look like wood. So that they can still have the art installation there where it looks, but it's not exactly the rotting wood from 2008, which was not weathering very well. I don't know if they didn't treat it or what happened, but it wasn't a good scene. And of course, it runs all the way from William and Wall all the way up to Broadway and Wall. And you'll see here right in front of Federal Hall, there's a plaque there that commemorates the wall palisade. I think yes, I do. And says what it was. It erects the border of the northern part of New Amsterdam. That is correct. And then it gives the dates of the wall. And the dates of the wall are completely wrong. 1653 to 1669. And sorry, guys, that's not right. The first inklings of the wall began in the 1640s. The wall was probably more solidified in 1653, so I'll give them that date. But as Mandy had told you, and as I will tell you now, we have cold, hard, documented evidence that the wall was taken down in 1699 in an effort to not only expand the city, but also to build the second city hall, which is where Federal Hall is today. Now, I always make the joke on the tour, you know, at least it's not etched in stone. Oh, whoops, it is etched in stone. I don't know why they didn't do their research a little better, but again, 1699 is when the wall went down. And again, if you're walking around the area with some friends, you can say, hey, look at that plaque. It's completely wrong. There are a lot of plaques in Lower Manhattan that aren't exactly right. This one was installed in 2008, so it should, you'd think it could be just a little more right, but whatever. We'll let it go. No, actually, I won't let it go. But now looking at this building, when this building was built, it was called the Pantheon of New York. It was JP Morgan's headquarters or headquartered bank. And we look at it today, it is abandoned. There was talk for a little while that maybe Apple was going to put in a financial district store down there, but I think they opted for the Oculus instead. And it is still unoccupied, absolutely gorgeous structure, but it holds, again, a historical remnant that you can reach out and touch and may not know about. So on September, I believe it was 16th is the date, 1920, at about noon, right before everybody was going to come out of their offices for lunch, somebody rolled up with a carriage full of explosives, detonated them. 38 people were killed instantly. Hundreds were injured. The blast knocked out windows in a 10-block radius. This was a really serious terrorist attack on Wall Street. And of course, nobody saw it coming. These are just some pictures of the aftershock. Here are pictures of people looking on. You can see the bodies that were killed in the fore, the stock exchange in the background. They're on the steps of 23 Wall, which was that JP Morgan building that I showed you. And of course, this was a horrible act and considered still to this day to be classified as unsolved. Nobody knew who it was. There were theories that it was anarchists, but nobody could really put their finger on exactly who did it. Now, J. Edgar Hoover used this act as a way to start the very early, what we know as the CIA today, because of this. And so again, here are just some very rare, I just had found these photos, these particular photos of the aftermath, and you could just see how devastating and awful this was. This is the side of the building that I showed you on Wall Street, looking at the JP Morgan building. It absolutely, the force of it gutted the JP Morgan building, blasted out the windows, and just did hell to the inside of it. And there was a car parked right outside. Now, take a look at the wall. This is the wall today. So the bomb pits or scarring from that bomb are still present on the side of 23 Wall Street today. And again, when I take tours around, I bring them right up. I say, take a look. Do you feel those? Does anybody know where they're from? Very few people ever know. It's not something we talk about a lot, that Wall Street bombing. But the evidence is right there in the wall, still to this day. Here's more under one of the windows. And again, this is from the shrapnel of the explosion of that bomb. And it actually, here is some, this is on the plaque under George Washington at Federal Hall. So it even got across the street. There are scratches on that as well, which are remnants from that bombing. And while we're here, let's talk about Federal Hall. Now, again, Federal Hall has a very interesting history. Like I said, in 1699, they took down the wall to build New York's second city hall. The first city hall was down on Pearl Street by Broad. And it was an all-purpose functioning building for the government of New York City. Now, in 1788, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, as you may know as the designer of Washington, D.C., comes and takes that city hall and turns it into something grander to become the first version of Federal Hall. Because remember, New York was going to be the capital of the United States after the Revolution. And of course, it's here. That's why you've got a statue of George Washington, where Washington is inaugurated the first president of the United States. This is no secret. I like this. This is a picture from Broad Street looking up to Wall, where the L'Enfant version of what would become Federal Hall is. You'll see the eagle crest up there. That balcony on the second floor is where Washington was inaugurated. Here's another view, Federal Hall on Wall Street in 1789. Not only was this where Washington was to be inaugurated, but the first Congress would sit here. And so many foundational acts of our country in its infancy were drafted in this building. You'll see the second version of Trinity Church up there in the foreground. The one that we know today is the third version. That one that we're looking at had a bum roof, which fell in during a very bad winter. So it didn't last too long. The first one was burned in 1776. Now, here is a depiction of Washington taking his oath as the first president. Very interesting. Of course, the Federal Hall that we have today is not that original building. The original building was taken down in 1842. Well, from the 1830s to 1842, the Federal Hall that we know today was being constructed as a replacement. They used Tuckahoe marble to build that building, same Tuckahoe marble that they used to build Washington Square Arch. Now, again, these are not secrets so much, but I think Federal Hall is one of the things that is most overlooked when you go downtown. Inside is this gorgeous rotunda. This was a project. It's not there anymore, but I took this picture 2 summers ago. There was a project done for Dutch Heritage Project because they had the Flushing Remonstrance on display in Federal Hall in one of the side rooms. So an artist came and did a depiction of a Dutch row house, which was there for a couple of months. It was kind of cool. But the rotunda itself is massively impressive. Very, very beautiful building. It started out first as the Customs House. And then as the Customs House moved downtown, it became the Sub-Treasury for a while. And then in 1920, when the Sub-Treasury came out, it became the Federal Hall that we know today. And it is a national park. So it's run by the National Parks Department. Now, here's the secret of the building that I showed people. During 9/11, I should back up. The building was built in the 1840s into the 1850s. And it was built sort of on an elevation. And when they built it, you have to remember there were no city services at the time. So you didn't have the sewers, you didn't have the subway, and you didn't have electric and steam running under the buildings at this point. So when they added all of the services under Federal Hall, what happened was they started creating air pocket gaps under some of the foundation of the building. And there were these 24-inch holes or pockets that Federal Hall was just sitting on air. What happened was during 9/11, when the force of the impacts of the towers falling reached Federal Hall, it's not that far away, Federal Hall structure started to crack. So a lot of the, I guess you would say, the west side of the building shook. And then these cracks started forming over the doorways of some of the side rooms and in the floor of Federal Hall itself. And this was an emergency. People realized you could not have this stand, that they had to go in very quickly and figure out what was going on. So a team of engineers and architects went under Federal Hall, found these air pockets, and then had to build caissons to actually firm it up. And today it is firmed up. The damage is still there. You can see it on the west side of the building, but the building is now structurally sound. But they had to do that work very quickly, or they feared they would lose half of the building. Here's my other favorite secret. If you go into the rotunda of Federal Hall, walk all the way to the back, you will see that there is a giant framed piece of brownstone. And you can read what it says. It says, standing on the stone in the balcony of Federal Hall on April 30th, 1789, George Washington took the oath as the first president of the United States of America. So this was on the balcony of the original Federal Hall, that painting I showed you. He stood upon it, swore his oath as president, and then they took that stone. They actually put it on display for a while in the original Federal Hall, and then as they took Federal Hall down, they needed somewhere to put it. So the first thing they did is they put a layer of concrete over it so they could put this inscription on it. Then they sent it to Bellevue, and it stood in Bellevue for decades. They put it in Bellevue Hospital so that patients could look at it and know that that was the stone of George Washington. Not that the patients didn't deserve to see the balcony that George Washington was inaugurated on, but I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning was for that. Not a high visibility area. Then they bring it back to Federal Hall. Federal Hall has it in a side room for a while. And they decide in 2012 that they want to move it out to the main rotunda. So when you walk into Federal Hall, you can see the stone. So you, obviously, the elephant in the room is the giant crack running down the stone. Now, of course, it's not anything as romantic as the crack in the Liberty Bell down in Philadelphia. This is much more sad, this story. It didn't have a crack until 2012 when they hired a firm to move this stone. They dropped it. They dropped it and they cracked it. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear the expletives that day when it fell and cracked right up that seam there. The only good news was the crack provides a little piece of a glimmer into the original brownstone before it was covered over by the concrete itself. And of course, when Federal Hall is open again, you can go in and see it. But again, nobody knows it's there. This is one of my favorite. I took this shot one day. I was doing a series of trying to get my head in some of these features. And one of my favorite spots is Federal Hall in New York. I think that it's so historically significant for so many reasons, not only for George Washington's inauguration, but a lot of the founding freedoms of our country were decided in this space before and after this structure was put up. And I absolutely love the historical significance of it. It broke my heart a little bit to see a couple of weeks ago during the protests that it was vandalized. I had talked to some people who were working there and they said, yes, they can clean it off. And I do understand, again, the need to protest, and I understand the need to have voices heard. As a matter of fact, those very rights were drafted in this building, which is why I think it might have been a little bit of a miss to hit this building. But again, it did break my heart a little bit, even though I agree, of course, with the sentiments behind it. I do not know if it's been cleaned since then. I haven't seen it since this picture was taken. But if anybody has any intel on that, let me know. Or I'm going to be in Lower Manhattan in a couple of days. I'm definitely going to take a look. So moving on to, of course, the stock exchange. And again, the stock exchange itself could be a whole talk inside and outside, the history behind it, what goes on there. I'm going to pick out my two, for this talk, favorite secrets about the stock exchange. And the stock exchange is a George B. Post building. It was opened in 1903 as the permanent and largest, grandest home of the stock exchange, since the stock exchange went through a series of other buildings which they couldn't hold on to. But two secrets here that I love to point out because you could stand outside and see them. One of which is the pediment right there. Now that pediment was designed by John Quincy Adams Ward. And George Post wanted the pediments, as most pediments in the early 1900s did, as most sculptures in the early 1900s did. He wanted them to tell a story, an allegory of what was going on. Now, this is called integrity, protecting the works of man. And as far as we know, that center figure is the humanization of integrity, or perhaps she's a goddess, and then everybody else is doing work. Now, the pediment was 90 tons of marble, which were sculpted by the Picarillis family, the very famous um, chiselers and carvers who did the Lincoln Memorial down in Washington. So they lift this 90-ton pediment up to the spot that you see it. They put it up there, and in the early 1930s, they noticed, uh-oh, it's a little too heavy for its spot. They found that it was sort of drooping, and pieces of it were about to fall off onto pedestrians. Now, when 90 tons of marble falls on somebody, that's the end of you. So they decided very quietly in the middle, well, not in the middle of the night, but literally very quietly, to take out the original marble pediment and replace it with a skeleton and copper overlay. So this is now 10 tons, by the way, a lot lighter, and designed much like the Statue of Liberty would be. And it looks like marble from down where we're standing, but it is like it's a replacement, but I say it's a fake. Now, Fearless Girl stands right outside of the stock exchange, facing looking up towards the stock exchange and the pediment. She knows what's going on. Fearless Girl was originally placed in front of the bull, the charging bull, which is going to be the last stop on this talk today. She was moved in 2018. Whole story will tell you at the bull about moving the bull and Arturo de Medica in a minute. But she is there now. The other day last time I saw her, she was masked. And of course, Fearless Girl stands for gender equality in business. Again, a really great sentiment, fully behind it. Of course, it was paid for by a company. And anything that sort of landed on her was a paid sponsorship for other companies to sort of get awareness. So some people say, she's great. A lot of people love taking pictures with her. A lot of people love the sentiment, but she is a sponsored sculpture. But I want to look at this tree. So you'll see right in the corner by that blue stock exchange, right there, that is a sycamore tree, which was planted 3 years ago by the stock exchange ceremoniously to mark the anniversary of the Buttonwood Agreement. And again, when they first planted it, its first summer, it looked like it wasn't going to make it, but it's been doing okay. Last time I saw it, which was a month ago, it's growing very well. And again, it's one of the only, if not the only tree on Broad Street. And it goes unnoticed, but again, very ceremoniously marking the celebration of the Buttonwood Agreement that starts the stock exchange. Go up to Broadway, look into the Churchyard of Trinity on the north side, not the churchyard on the south side. Churchyard on the south side has Robert Fulton. We've got Alexander Hamilton, stuff that we've covered or will cover in other talks. I want to talk about someone nobody knows about, and his name is James Leeson. James Leeson, not a historically significant figure in New York's history. We can deduce by his headstone that he was a Mason because the Mason insignia is on it. What's very unique about James Leeson's tombstone is that there is what seems to be alien writing on it. And of course, for many years, it spooked and freaked out people, and people who were obsessed with cryptograms and all of these things spent a long time to try to decipher the code. By the way, James Leeson was buried in 1794. The oldest burial in the churchyard, I believe, is from 1688. It was a 5-year-old child, and it's not too far from James Leeson. So this is really the oldest part of Trinity's churchyard, this area, which I'll go back, is right behind this monument here. So James Leeson, I believe, is right around here. And that's a Google Street View, by the way. So what does this say? Well, you first have to figure out the cipher to figure out what he's trying to say. And somebody finally did. It's an old Masonic cipher. And so this is what you would use to decode what was on the top of James Leeson's grave. And look back really quickly, you see the hourglass with the wings, sort of the Latin inscription, Tempus Fugit comes to mind. And this is all about time. and your time here on earth. And James Leeson was in his late 30s when he died, so he did not live to be very old. There's also an eternal flame in that cauldron with a heart in the center of it. So sort of the eternal soul is represented. And using the cipher, what is the message that James Leeson wants us to know? Remember death. Um, that's what he's telling all of us. Anybody on Broadway walking by, as I'm sure lots of us are rushing back and forth to do things, get to work, get home from work, run to get lunch, whatever's going on around Trinity, take a stop, take a look, remember death. That is his message to us. And I sort of love it. I sort of love the cryptogram sitting right in the middle of the city. Art. So my last story I leave you with for the secrets of this financial district talk. And again, we could do so many more. There can be other installments to this. This again, I chose these spots because I didn't want to interfere with other talks either coming or prior. That is Arturo de Medica. I'm not sure if it's a hard C or a soft C. Somebody can correct me. Great guy. Looks like Wim Hof. Love him. Of course, he casts this guy, probably one of the biggest tourist attractions in Lower Manhattan, the Charging Bull. And the story behind the Charging Bull is such a New York story. So Arturo casts this, and he plops it outside on Broad Street, basically right around where Fearless Girl is now, outside of the stock exchange in December of 1989. Actually, I want to get the date exactly right because it's important. December 15th, 1989. And he leaves it as a Christmas gift for New Yorkers. And of course, the idea is to symbolize sort of the ups and downs of the market and the opportunities in America. It's very, very heavily symbolized. But it was a guerrilla gift. Arturo paid $350,000 of his own money to give this gift to New York. He was not paid, he was not commissioned, nor was he sanctioned to leave the bull where it was. So New York City impounds the bull. They take it, impound it, and it had such, I guess, an aura of New York grittiness. People loved it that they literally demanded that the bull be brought back. So instead of putting it on Broad Street, which at the time in the late 1980s was a traffic nightmare because it wasn't shut off to traffic at the time, by December 21st, so December 15th, it's impounded. He drops it there. The next day, it's impounded. By December 21st, because of public outcry, it's brought and put where it is today, right in front of Bowling Green, and it's been there ever since. Now, really interesting story. I end my version. Mandy ends down on Broad Street and Wall. I end my Dutch New Amsterdam tour here at the Bull for a couple of reasons. One of which is I love to tell that story. Second, when Fearless Girl showed up, Art was not thrilled about it. Not because, again, he didn't enjoy the sentiment of the sculpture, but he said, this is really big business paying for this sculpture to be here. And actually, mine was a gift and mine was, art and all this stuff, and he wanted it removed. But of course, everybody said, you have no right. You were unsanctioned, and this was actually sanctioned. So I had said that Art moved this in the middle of the night and put it there. They moved it again. I ended the tour and I said, who knows, maybe he'll move the bull at some point. And somebody taps me on the shoulder at the end of a Dutch New Amsterdam tour and says, hi, introduces himself. I said, hello. He goes, I'm on Art's team. And I looked at him and I said, I'm sorry, what? And he goes, Arturo, I'm good friends with Arturo. I was in the van when he placed it in front of the stock exchange. I was in the van when we moved it to where it is. And Art called me up a couple of weeks ago and said, there's a possibility I want to move it again, so get ready. Now, this was probably 7 or 8 months ago that I heard this, and it's still where it is, so I'm sure it's not going anywhere. Although now would be a good time to move it because there's nobody around it. And of course, this is usually the scene around the bull. It's usually crowded. They just, before the pandemic, started forming lines. They actually have representatives from the Downtown Alliance there, getting people to queue up to take pictures with the bull. And of course, what does everybody wait online to do? Rub his testicles. That's the big thing to do. And you can tell his testicles are the shiniest part of him. Um, I'm assuming it's for good luck or just to get a picture with that. And the reason why I end the Dutch New Amsterdam tour here is because when in New Amsterdam times, Bowling Green was used as a cattle trading spot in the spring and in the fall. All the New Amsterdammers would come out with their cattle and trade with one another. And I find that it's very fitting. You know, in New York, we have all of these cyclical history stories that, of course, this bull lands right where there were probably bulls sitting there waiting to be traded at some time. So I like to say, my line is history like our tour has come full circle. And I will say that our tour has come full circle. And that is my secrets of the financial district. I see there are a lot of chats. So if you have questions for me, let's see. I'm going to see if I can read some, but if you've got anything you want to bring back to my attention, I'm going back. I'm going back. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Peter Gorey, yes. Terrorist equal bomb maker. Chemist equal bomb maker. As far as I know, he did not devise bombs. All right, so I think I got to the top of the chat. Was it closed at the time of the fire? Jeffrey Bernard, do you mean the American Museum? I think you do. And I believe the answer to the question was no. Yes, it was closed. It was overnight. I'd have to double check on that, but oh, Margot from Bloomingdale. I love it. Thank you for saying Bloomingdale. That's so cool. He kept the American Museum from Scudder, who owned it previously and didn't exhibit live. Yes, that's true. So thank you, Matthew. He bought the American Museum, was there in the spot. He sensationalized it. Has the cracked glass been replaced? Robin, do you mean, well, I can't even see you answering. If you mean in St. Paul's, last time I checked it was not, but I haven't been in St. Paul's in a very long time. Oh, you mean the clock. I'm sorry. The cracked glass has been replaced, yes. If you mean the clock, Robin. This is the this is the hazard of being the only one doing this today, is that I can't go on while you're answering me. What did they do on those days when the hour was set ahead or back? Good question. They could lift the clock up out of, they would take the glass up and the mechanism could just be winded. The whole thing pops out, it's a cylinder, and the machine, the mechanism is under the clock face itself. It's actually, I was told by one of the mechanics who was replacing the clock that day that I was telling that story, he said to me that it's very simple to get the clock out. What was really troubling them was getting the right measurements to make the new clock, to make it fit the circle exactly. If you want to know some of the other crazy stuff the Finians in the U.S. got up to, read the book, The Catalpa Rescue by Peter Fitzsimmons. David Ryan, I really want to get into the Finians. They seemed like they were absolutely fascinating, and they don't get a lot of coverage in American history. I had heard there's a podcast called Ridiculous History, I believe it is, and Ridiculous History did cover the story about the invasion of Canada very lightly. But that was basically all that I've heard lately in the mainstream about the Finians. Okay, where did my cursor go? Keep going down. Could no one climb over the fence back in the day? I know, right? I guess colonists were just, they saw a locked gate and they knew, don't touch it. I believe you mean for Peter Taylor Bowling Green. Is there a picture with crowns on it? I am yet to find one, Janet. I really would like to. There are a bunch of paintings of that evening, representations. A couple of them don't even have the fence at all. But if anybody knows or sees or has seen a painting or representation of that evening on July 9th with the crowns, that would be awesome. I would love to see it. I love the park too, Diana. It's an amazing, amazing park. It's a really great little respite. Stanley, I know you sent this privately, but I will answer it publicly. The school that I taught in was called Our Lady of Sorrows on the corner of Pitt and Stanton Street. It was the second oldest Catholic school building in New York. Really interesting place. I also did some time at PS 140 across the street as well. So I had bounced back and forth from both facilities. And Our Lady of Sorrows was a really interesting place because of all of it. They're run by Capuchins, and the students were mainly from the projects in the surrounding area. And it was really neat to get them out into their own neighborhood to experience history because they just had no idea. Elevated Acre is amazing. Yes, Ralph, the tail of the horse is at the New York Historical Society. There are pieces of the horse in small, there are, I think, 2 or 3 pieces in smaller museums in Connecticut. And I can get you that information. We're going to add it to the long list of things I owe you, Ralph. But there, because the horse was sent up to Connecticut to be melted down to turn into musket bullets, pieces of it were saved for posterity. My favorite story about the head of King George III was the head was actually taken by a British officer. No, scratch that. It was taken by a patriot, put up on a spike outside of a pub in Washington Heights, or the Washington Heights area by Fort Washington. Then a British officer stole it and buried it in Kingsbridge in the Bronx, right on the other side of the river, where Captain Montresor himself went, unburied the head and took it back to England and gave it to Lady Townsend herself of the Townsend Acts, where she would pull it out at parties during the Revolution and say, look at how much our American children love us. And there was a musket bullet right in the middle of the forehead. They shot the forehead. That's a bonus story for you. Is the roof accessible to the public? Yes, the Elevated Acre, if that's what you mean, yes, it is accessible to the public. You do not have to be a worker at 55 Broadway. Just go right up the escalators on street level. Slave Market was also the meal market, just making sure. Yes, it was called the meal market because they were also selling grains. Grains were the second biggest commodity. Museum of American Finance is closed permanently, Jeffrey? I did not know that. The audio cut out when you explained why the slave market was called the meal market. Okay, so just to explain again, it was called the meal market because there was grain, wheat, and also corn being sold from that spot as well. I wonder if the scaffolding will ever come down. I'm not sure where you mean, Jeffrey. Who owns the Pantheon now? I do not know. I believe it is a private investment, and they were trying really hard to get a high-end renter in there, tenant in there. Apple was going to do it. Then they wanted to do sort of like a New York experience in there, kind of turn it into one of those virtual 360-degree experiences, but that never panned out either. So I'm not exactly sure where it is in that spot, but I know it's a high-end developer, and I don't remember the name. I'll look it up for you, Matthew. But it is, again, as you go by it even today, it is abandoned. How shameful, boo. Is it possible for you to photograph the inside of the stock exchange? You need to be, there are tours. You need to be brought in. I believe you need to know somebody who works in the stock exchange to get a pass. As a matter of fact, we have an article, Michelle and Augustin went in a couple of years ago because they knew somebody on the trading floor and took pictures of it. I'll dig up the link and send it to you. And yes, Diana answered that question. Has the girl bull placement been sorted? Yes, so she's staying where she is. The girl is staying where she is. There was talk, I remember about a year ago, de Blasio said he wanted to move the bull because where the bull was, again, it's in the middle of Broadway. So many people were coming to visit. They were spilling out into Broadway. It was becoming a hazard. I believe the sort of middle road on that was the Downtown Alliance would queue people up and manage them to keep the bull there. And I think that's what they were doing pre-pandemic. I'm not sure if that's a temporary or permanent situation though. Nicole, hi, how are you, Nicole? Love the gravestone cipher. Good to see you, Nicole. Hope all is well. Yes, the hourglass on the doors in Greenwood, Janet. Yes, Janet, my Greenwood friend. I'm not sure, Diana, what Jeffrey, the Downtown Alliance. Oh, does the Downtown Alliance do tours as well in the stock exchange? I'm not sure, but maybe, Diana. Possibly you know better than me. I think it's fine to take a picture with the bull. Why not? All right, so thank you, thank you, thank you. The case, the plaque is, oh, hi, Mandy. Thank you for elaborating on that. Again, Mandy, who made that comment, if you did not join Mandy's first Dutch New Amsterdam talk, it's amazing, it's in the archives. Mandy will be doing a version 2 in July. Mandy, we have a date. I believe it's July 17th. We have to talk about that. Where did they put Washington's pew? So Washington's pew is in St. Paul's, and where it is exactly in St. Paul's, I'm not sure. Again, it's been years since it's been there, since I've been inside St. Paul's. Actually been over 10 years since I've been inside, but there is a picture of Washington hanging above it. The elevated Acre is on 55 Water. So that's basically right when it's a block north of Whitehall Street and Water, right when you walk around the Battery, you get to the Staten Island Ferry, just walk a little further north. It's on your right side, 55. Go right up, it's a tan building, and in the center of the tan building is a set of stairs and escalators. Just go right up. It's a little bit of a climb, but it's a really great spot. It's well worth it. There are spikes on the fence. I'll take a look. What is that in reference to, Mandy? Oh, for the crowns. Okay, cool. A tour in Quebec does cover the attempted invasions of Canada. Yes, they do remember. I believe there's a monument too in a park somewhere to it. And it was sort of, I believe the monument was put in sort of defiance of the attack and sort of in favor of the Queen. I believe it was a whole big deal. They were like, "Oh, we love the Queen, and we'll never, we'll never subjugate to the Irish invading us." And of course, they never stood a chance. Thank you, Nicole, for the link. Oh, Stephen, you made a good point. The oldest obelisk is Cleopatra's Needle because it's from Egypt. This is the oldest obelisk in commemoration of a New Yorker. Sorry, I should have made that point. So this was the first made obelisk for a New Yorker in New York. Yes, but Cleopatra's Needle is obviously by date older. Cleopatra, though, was not a New Yorker. What is it with you guys trying to invade Canada all the time? Funny. Oh, Robin, I didn't know your dad designed 55 and 77, both on the tour. Was it originally real water and fish? Yeah, no, I know that today there's rocks. It's actually pretty cute. There's rocks and then there's the steel fish jumping. Thank you, Ralph, for joining me. Stock exchange photos. Thank you, Nicole. Nicole, it's so good to have you here. Also, the question, the roof regarding 77. So you have to actually contact the owners now. George Kaufman, I believe his sons have taken over management of the building. And they bring up people periodically to see the plane. You can't go as a public, but if you actually reach out to them, they have let people up there. We haven't gotten a chance to go up there yet. Mel Kaufman. So then George must be one of the sons. Thank you, Robin. I know George was one of the guys. Oh, maybe you're right. I thought there was a George. It could be a playwright too, because that comes from my playwriting experience. Are there no good secrets of Stone Street? Yes, there are good secrets of Stone Street. I'm leaving Stone Street deliberately off this tour because either Mandy or I will cover Stone Street on a subsequent tour. So we are going to leave Stone Street where it is. I almost covered, my favorite secret about Stone Street is the hallway that goes through 85 Broad, which is a big part of the Dutch New Amsterdam tour. So I'll leave you with that story, and then either Mandy or I on a subsequent talk will elaborate. But 85 Broad in the 1980s, late 70s, they bought a plot of land that cut Stone Street off in the original Dutch street grid from the 1660s. And it was a Goldman Sachs building. And there was an outcry from historians and archaeologists. As a matter of fact, archaeologists got to dig up remnants of foundations of other buildings and found artifacts under there. Also, another great secret that I deliberately left off of this tour, which will show up on a subsequent tour. And they were apologetic about it. They went, "Whoops, our fault." So what they did was they put plaques at either entrance to 85 Broad, which is, Stone Street continues from Broadway to 85 Broad, and then goes all the way down through the building, which was public access for many years. It's not during the weekend. They shut it off. And inside the building, they put Euro cobble in the hallway, so it looks like a street. And all of the art and architectural nods in the hallway are street grid themed. So on the plaque that they put on either side of the door, they put that this used to be Hoogstraat, which meant high street in Dutch. And they said, "Sorry, we put the building right on the middle of it," basically is what they said. And then Stone Street continues through the building out to the other side. And of course, Stone Street on the other side of Broad is some of the oldest collections of buildings in the financial district, built on older foundations, which were buildings before the fire of 1835. We could do a whole talk on Stone Street, my Lord. Yeah, look at Mandy just said it. Oh, just the Secrets of Stone Street program would be cool. All right, Mandy, let's get on it. Let's do it together, Mandy. We need to do a talk together, Mandy. Let's do it together. I heard light sculpture at Elevated Acre is in memory of the Siemens Institute. That is, I believe, Margot, you are talking about the time ball at Fulton, which is the entrance to the seaport. If that's what you're talking, it was on top of the original Siemens Institute building, or Siemens Church, Siemens Institute building. It was taken down in the 60s and installed outside of the entrance to the seaport. And yes, the time ball on top of it drops at noon so that all of the ships in the harbor could synchronize their chronometers. I think that's what you mean, unless there is another sculpture in the Elevated Acre that is a monument I don't know about. The Siemens Institute headquarters is now on the seaport neighborhood as well. It was on Water Street, then it moved to South Street at another location, I believe, in the 60s, and then moved to where it is now. It's a very modern building. Any other questions? I should hook you up with my, I really, Robin, I still think we need to do a Roth talk. Just saying. Putting that out there. I know you sent that to me privately, Robin, but I'd love to talk about some of the buildings and also talk about the buildings that he put on the, talk about the panorama, the whole thing. All right, let's talk about it, Robin. Let's put together a Roth talk. All right, Roth talk. I love it. It's got a catchy name. Oh, by the way, Norma, I saw your question. CIA, not FBI. I do believe, and somebody can correct me, and I can refer to my notes, that it was the CIA, but I could be wrong. It was, oh no, maybe it is the FBI. It was called the original title was the Radical Division of the Justice Department Bureau of Investigation, was the original. So FBI, I guess Federal Bureau of Investigation, does make more sense. But again, he used that bombing as the impetus to create that department, which then does become. All right, Robert, thank you. So the CIA is from World War I. So yeah, this would be after World War I, it's 1920. So Norma, you are correct. It is the FBI. I apologize for giving that information. Glad we corrected it. Anybody else? This was fun, guys. As usual, always fun. All right, so tomorrow we do not have any programming. I will be filming on Ellis Island tomorrow, so wish me luck. Friday at 11, not at noon. Usually our stuff starts at noon. At Friday, we are going to be back with Karen Carbiner, who is the president and founder of the Walt Whitman Institute, or initiative, I'm sorry, Walt Whitman Initiative. And she will be leading us on a virtual walk around the village in basically in the purview and point of view of Whitman. That will come with a poem to read, by the way. So you'll be getting a poem from me. Well, it's a Whitman poem in your mailbox that morning before the talk if you join us. So please sign up. Ellis Island, quick question. Go ahead, Matthew. Ask. Thankfully, we have Mandy here because Mandy is Miss Ellis Island. No, I can answer this one. Yes, we are back in league. It's why I'm over at Ellis Island tomorrow. I'm filming some virtual tours for them on Save Ellis Island's behalf. And once the pandemic is over, Untapped will be once again offering, in partnership with Save Ellis Island, the Contagious Infectious Disease Hospital Tour and the JR Art Tour. It is a phenomenal, phenomenal tour. And you can only imagine how humbled and amazing it is for me to be able to go over there. I've been over there already with nobody else on the island but John McGinnis and myself running around these spaces. It's absolutely amazing. And yes, Mandy developed the curriculum for the tour. So Mandy's been helping me. So yeah, come on down once we reopen. There's been talk that there may be a soft open at some point in August, but hopefully, definitely by the fall, we will be bringing people back over there for Save Ellis Island. It's amazing. And thank you, Mandy, for all the hard work you did for them, because I'm reading Mandy's notes. All right, and that is it for me. Any other questions, just let me know. You can certainly email me at justin@untappedcities.com. And like I've been saying, these videos, once I am done, we get a rough cut of them. I do some editing, put a couple of graphics in, and then we put them in the archives. So about 2 to 3 days after they're recorded, they will be in the archives to enjoy for you as insiders. So I thank you the light sculpture. Thank you, Margot. I clicked on that link so that it comes up when I sign off. Oh, that light sculpture. Now I see what you're talking about. All right, I will get more information on this. Thank you, Margot. Everybody have a great day. Be safe. See you soon.